All right, so the last things that we need to look at in Chapter 5 are at 5.6 and 5.7. 5.6 is just a bit of terminology that we'll use from time to time. It's what's called an enthymeme. An enthymeme is an argument that's missing a statement, and there's three specific types. If you have a first-order enthymeme, it means that you're missing the major premise. If you have a second-order enthymeme, it means you're missing the minor premise. And if you have a third-order enthymeme, it means that you're missing the conclusion. Now, why would this be? Well, individuals will leave out a premise for various reasons. One of the most common is simply because they don't think that it's needed. It seems very obvious, so why should I have to state it? Back in Chapter 1, we had that example, all leopards with lungs are carnivores, therefore all leopards are carnivores. And we said at the time that that was not a valid argument because it didn't explicitly tell us that all leopards have lungs. And so we could not directly draw the conclusion from it. Now, a person making that argument would probably feel that it's redundant to make that statement. I mean, everybody knows that leopards have lungs. Why should I have to state it? But in order to be able to properly evaluate the argument, that information has to be there. And so you would have an incomplete argument without it. So even if it seems obvious, it needs to be there. But many times people will leave it out because they find that it's obvious. It's your job to put it back in. The other reason is because they're trying to con you or fool you in some way. If you have an argument that sounds really good on the surface, but then all of a sudden there's one piece of evidence that if I introduce this one piece of evidence, it's going to destroy the argument. A lot of times people will, instead of dealing with that, they'll just leave that right out of the argument. They won't even bother with it. Let's say, for example, we've got the argument that most dogs are harmless. There's a dog approaching me right now, therefore I should be able to pet that dog without any difficulty. Sounds perfectly reasonable. But what if the one piece of evidence that I left out was that the little dog that's coming towards me is foaming at the mouth? That could be a sign of rabies or some other major issue, which means that that animal would not be safe at all. So I need to have that information in order to correctly evaluate it. But anyway, that's what an enthymeme is. It's just an argument that's missing a statement, and before you can properly evaluate it, you would have to have a way of incorporating that information back into it. Okay. The other thing that we're going to look at, and the more important thing, excuse me a minute. The more important thing we're going to look at is what's called a sorite. A sorite is a series of linked or connected arguments that is building towards a singular conclusion. Now, when this happens, what you're going to need to do is to break the argument down into its individual parts and test each part individually. On the screen, you'll see an example here. All B are D, all D are M, therefore no F are M, therefore no F are B. Okay, so again, all B are D, all D are M, no F are M, therefore no F are B. Now there's no way you could evaluate this argument the way that it's presented now, because a syllogism, and therefore the mood and figures, the rules method, all of those things work on a syllogism, two premises leading to a conclusion. But this is three premises leading to a conclusion. When you see that, you know that there's actually two arguments that are being made here, and we need to break them down and test them independently. the argument, the sorite, is only as strong as its weakest part. Now, the number of premises you have is going to tell you how many arguments there are within that larger picture. There's always one less argument than there are lines. So we have 3 lines, it's going to be 2 arguments. 4 lines would be 3 arguments. 5 lines would be 4 arguments, and so on. Now the way to approach this is to look at the 3 premises and say, okay, do I have 2 premises that could work together to give me a valid argument? Use your coined word method to help you out. For example, if I look at the first 2 lines, all B are D, all D are M, I see that I would have A, we don't know what the conclusion is yet, but A something, figure 4. If I look under my figure 4 column, I see that there is no argument that makes that, but you can use these in any order that you want. So what if we brought the second line up to the top and made that all D are M, and the second line to the bottom made that all B are D? Well, now we would see A something figure 1, and if you look on your column there, Barbara is A figure 1. That's a valid form. So not only do we see that that's a valid form, but we also know what the conclusion is. And this conclusion, this is basically a third order enthymeme because the conclusion has not been stated yet. It's there, as we learned before. It's already contained within the premises, so you're not adding anything new to the argument, but you're making it manifest. You're making it available for us to use. So we know that it's going to be AAA figure 1, so this is going to be an A statement, all R. Now, middle term is a D, which means that the minor term is a B. The minor term is always the subject, and the major term is M, right? So, because that's always the predicate of the conclusion. So now we've seen that that first argument is valid via Barbara. Okay. But now there's one more line here. So let's go ahead and bring that over here. No F, R, M. So now what you're looking at is that the conclusion that you've derived from this, all B, R, M, becomes another premise, to which we add the remaining premise from over here, no F, R, M. And so now we have A, E, figure 2. And if we look on our list, we'll see that there is an AEE figure 2, chemistries. So, AEE figure 2, we know the conclusion has to be an E statement, so that's no R. M is the middle term on this one, so F is the minor, B is the major. Okay. And so that argument was valid via Barbara. This one we've seen is valid via chemistries. And most importantly, we can also see that the conclusion that we've reached, no FRB, is the conclusion of the original argument that we wanted to reach. So now that we've shown that both of the intermediate parts of this sorite are valid, we can conclude that the original argument here is a valid argument form. Okay? And that's basically the way that the sorite is going to work. If you can work through it and reach the conclusion, then it's valid. If not, then it ends up being invalid. If you get to some point where you're stuck and can't move any further, then that is going to imply that it's invalid. So let's look at another one of these. And let me steal from your book here. All right, so let's try this one. We have all SRM. Okay. All SRM, all KRM, no KRR, some FRR, therefore, some F are not S. Okay, so there are 4 premises, which means there are 3 arguments that are presented here, and we have to see if we can use them to reach that conclusion of some F are not S. All right, so I usually just start at the top and see if there's a way of making those first 2 lines work together. If they are, that's great. If there's not, then we move on to something else. All S are M, all K are M, that would be AA something figure 2. That doesn't work. What about 2 and 3? All K are M, no K are R. That would be AE something figure 3. AE, no, there's no AE under figure 3. 3 and 4, no K or R, some F or R. That would be EI figure 2. We do have an EI figure 2, so let's work with that to start with. So we have no K R R, and we have some F R R. And we said EI something figure 2, Festino is EIO. So some F R K. All right, so that's valid via Festino. Now, some FRK, can we use that with any of these other lines? What would happen if we brought this one down? So we have all SRM. Well, actually, that couldn't work at all, could it? Because there's no middle term. So let's try the second line, all KRM. That would be IA figure 4. We have an IA figure 4, Demarest, IAI figure 4. So, Demarest IAI, so this has to be an I statement, which is the sum R. Middle term is the K, so the minor term is M, major is F. So we would derive some M R F. So this was valid via Demarest. Now, some M R F. Now we have only one line left, so we'll have to bring that one down and see if it'll work. Some S R M. So we have II figure 1. Look on our list, that does not exist. Even if you flipped the order of these, it would be II figure 4. That doesn't exist either. So no matter what you do, no matter what you try, you're not going to get a valid argument from those 2, which means that you're not going to be able to reach the original conclusion, some F or not S, which means that this argument is an invalid argument. Okay, so hopefully you have understood the basic idea behind the Sorites. I wanted to take you to page right around page 310. It's exercise 5.7. And here you're presented with some of these Sorites, and I just wanted to give you a few of them to try. So this will be the second part of the homework for this week, 5.7, and you just do 1 through 4. That'll give you a little bit of practice with it. The Sorites will not be a major part of the chapter 5 exam. It'll probably end up being an extra credit question, but I'll give you a little bit of practice with it anyway, so that you can see if you get the hang of it. And then hopefully next week the computer and internet or whatever the issue is will be working properly, And when we go through all of the homework, both last week's homework and this week's, we will take any questions that you have, and I will explain it in person, so that you can, so that we can kind of interact with each other and hopefully make sure that you've understood it. But at least this way, through these 3 videos, you've had the chance to get a little bit of explanation beyond what the book does, to be able to do the homework and get you guys ready to move on. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I will try to answer things if I can through email. If not, we'll get to them at the live class on Friday of next week. All right. So have a good day. Best of luck. We'll see you then.